And TIA's industry research in the communications technology industry has now reached the 20-year mark, educating and informing our members and the wider communications audience about the market trends to expect and also to avoid in the next 4 years. This year's market review and forecast will once again inform our audience as we take a look back and forward to the trends in our industry. Here to give us an overview of these trends and technologies are John Jackson. He's Program Vice President for Mobility Research at IDC, and John Jacobs right next to me, Vice President of Market Intelligence and Strategy, that for TIA, that's the Telecommunications Industry Association. And gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Abe.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks for being here. John Jackson and John Jacobs, same initials and same first name. So I will call you respectively by your full names throughout the end of the program. Just not only for our audience, by the way, for you guys to know who I'm talking to.
Great.
Similar haircuts as well.
Yeah, I didn't want to go there, but okay. John Jacobs, I want to start with you. Just kind of give us a quick overview of what TIA is getting behind really in the market intelligence space as far as maybe research reports or case studies.
Sure. So this year, 2016, TIA has released an IoT report around June timeframe, around our annual conference. And we did that in concert with Machinery Research, with Andy Castingay and Godfrey Chua. And it's a great report. It's available on TIA's website. We're currently in the midst of preparing a 5G survey. That is a 5G carrier survey, European and North American service provider focused.
Now I'd like to really reference some illustrations in this year's market review and forecast as we go through these different topics. I'm going to go right into it with the first topic on equipment spending compared to the services market. I'd like to go to and there it is, the pace-setting services and equipment spending in the U.S. in dollars, by the way, as others are in percentage. We'll get to those in a second. Equipment spending clearly is flat, John, while services are really on a steep rise. What do you attribute this to, and do you think that the build-out of 5G technologies will change this trend in equipment spending?
Well, so they're actually both growing at different rates. So clearly, you can see the services revenue piece has a higher starting point than the hardware investment piece for spend. Right, this is a dollar spend. That said, you're absolutely right. Services is the lion's share of the revenue and also has a higher growth rate. This grouping of pace-setting services and equipment investments is a rather broad grouping. It's gigabit Ethernet, it's wireless, it's NFE, SDN, and other groupings of high growth rate, double-digit growth year over year services and products. For example, if you take this apart, look at NFV investment over the next 5 years. That's a 32% CAGR, which is really significant. That's 2016 through 2020. This report looks in that date range. Machine-to-machine itself is a 21% annual growth rate. So the last point I'll make is that as technology investments are made on the equipment side, the monetization of those services, technologies are borne out on the service side. So you're seeing an investment on the service side in order to monetize as well.
And John Jackson, let's go to the next MR&F graphic. It's on wireless data traffic in the US and millions of gigabytes, by the way. Clearly here you can see that wireless data growth is peaking and staying peaked for the foreseeable future. John, what's the impact, what impact is this having on the communications technology industry, and why does this matter as we really place bets on the future, and specifically for service providers, by the way? Thank you.
So sure, yeah. Thanks, Dave. The growth is almost. It's just hard to even fathom sort of the magnitude of what is going on here. And the overwhelming component, as far as we can tell, and as far as some of the network equipment providers can tell, and they publish on this, Ericsson, for example, is video. But it is just an issue of how do we, as a technology sector, handle this tonnage, and really this is the thing that is driving the investments in network function virtualization and SDN, but really it's a driver of 5G as well, in as much as this can only be handled. The presumptions behind this, the assumptions in this growth, I think presume that a system-centric approach to accommodating this traffic, right? So that means SDN and NFE, yes, but it also means things like higher order throughput, lower latency, all of this type of thing. As far as the placing bets on the future of service providers, here in the U.S., I think it'll be interesting to, almost, you ask an AT&T or a Verizon Wireless executive how they'll describe their business 5 years hence, given the investments that have gone on recently, and you wonder how they'll describe it. So it really is driving a fundamental transformation in the traditional service provider market structure and the traditional service provider modus operandi, where they're investing, how they're investing, and the race is on, I think, to transform their networks.
One thing I'll just mention quickly, we're in this, as we prepare for our 5G research report, a lot of the topic on offload is coming up, a lot of interest on small cell, the ability to get that traffic quickly off the macro network. And as John said, to treat it more efficiently while on the macro network as well, on the wireless side, also on the wireline side.
John Jackson, I want to go back to another MR&F illustration, the growth of pace-setting markets in the U.S., and this one is by percentage. Clearly here, again, you see the percentage of growth in the wireless and network virtualization is quite a bit higher than other areas of technology. Those don't include, by the way, voice over IP and business Ethernet, but the rest of those technologies for the majority anyway. What are the drivers for these trends in the market, and how does this position stakeholders and maybe the hardware equipment business through 2020?
Sure. Okay. So yeah, a couple of things. I think John Jacobs, I think he mentioned before that look, this is a story of broad growth. So there's growth across the categories here. In this instance, with wireless or network virtualization, you do have that issue where it is relatively high growth off a relatively smaller base. So I think the actual numbers behind this are something like 3.2 billion. For NFV or virtualization in 2016 is what the report is calling for, versus something like 90 billion for cloud services. So you do have kind of a magnitude issue at play here. Now, having said that, I think the growth is clearly quite significant, and I think it is just a direct reflection of the appetite for tonnage on the network, right? So you cannot accommodate this unless you're making these investments. As far as the future of hardware equipment businesses, I think the recipe is clear, right? The way this is going is toward sort of commodity hardware, but it's the recipe is for modularity and flexibility. So it's not going to be what it once was in terms of proprietary or bespoke hardware for a given function. But rather, the recipe is to accommodate, to future-proof your customers and keep up with that and hopefully monetize that as the networks continue to transform.
John, John Jacobs, I want to go to another area of our industry that's really plateauing as well, and I'll go again to the MR&F on backbone infrastructure spending growth in the U.S. and also growth of annual single-mode fiber deployment also in the U.S. Again, looking at this graphic, backbone infrastructure spending has once again, again plateaued and doesn't seem to be picking up steam anytime soon. What do you attribute this to, and what are stakeholders in the fiber business doing to pivot to stay relevant?
Sure. So actually, you think about fiber. Fiber is it's a build forward type of business. So building to capacity, building to planned capacity needs. So it has a cyclicality to it. So it's not a straight line behavior. It is often from a build out perspective more efficient to build out big chunks of fiber in metro areas, for example, or known and defined rural areas for, say, broadband service. But those don't happen in a flat way. They happen in waves. So if you look at the market review and forecast around the 2010-2011 period, you had a 54% year-over-year growth, 11 over 10. That's massive. And so what you're seeing now, that was the top of a wave, and now we're coming into a bit of a trough. The question is, are we meeting capacity demands and needs that are forecasted for the next 5-year period? This data would suggest, yes, we are, given these growth rates. It's all about growth. There's no deinstalling. But I'll just take you back, just lastly, we all know about 20 years ago, 15 years about dark fiber, right? And we had that big investment. Well, the industry has really learned from that. And so they don't build for empty capacity, they build for use.
Mm-hmm. John Jackson, I really want to get to some really progressive, if you will, or forward-leaning technologies. 5G, of course, is one of those. Did we ever define what 5G was, and what's it really intended to support, and what would your definition look like for 5G?
So I think you have it illustrated here, and of course there's no shortage of definitions for 5G, and we won't get a sort of official hardened definition of 5G until sometime in the sort of 2020 timeframe. But I think I borrowed a graphic here from our friends at the 5G PPP. I think we have a very good idea of what 5G seeks to achieve across a number of dimensions. The graphic here, I think, is a very good illustration of the kind of magnitude of dimensional improvements that are being sought versus 4G and where they're being sought, right? So I would call out a couple of highlights, beginning with connection densities growing exponentially. So, there are requirements for massive machine type communication scenarios. I attended the Intel Developer Forum in the summer, a couple of months ago, and there was some talk, a lot of 5G focus there. To illustrate that, there was some talk about accommodating 1 million endpoints in a square kilometer, which to me seems like an almost a very good kind of almost visual context for what we're trying to achieve there. There's ultra-high mobility separately, so that means beamforming and beam tracking. These are extraordinarily computationally intensive things that need to be true for the 5G promise to be realized. 10-year battery life, not necessarily illustrated in the graphic, but there's a point here about energy efficiency at the network level. So 10-year battery life targets are something that we see today with low power wide area efforts, both standardized and not standardized, but that will sort of be the law, if you like, in 5G. And then finally, ultra high mobility and very, very low latency are kind of like the sine qua non, if I can use a foreign language term on this, on this broadcast of 5G. So they go together, right? There's some skepticism internally here at IDC as we kind of debate this around whether the sub 1 millisecond latency can be achieved. And I think nobody really presumes that this is a round trip back to a core and back out to an endpoint. Maybe it is more likely that it's your car talking to my car and we're going point to point as we pass each other, so we're situationally aware in that way. But I think this is just this is just kind of a summary of the highlights, if you will. Plenty more behind this.
John Jacobs, I want to go to network functions virtualization. It's sort of a two-part question. One, I want to find out what you extract really from the next illustration in the MR&F called the growth of network virtualization technologies. Some really numbers all over the board there. That's the first part. Second part is, are we learning how to monetize NFE? But let's go to the chart first.
Sure. So obviously these are all growth curves, and you could see sort of a rationalization early on, the early years. I mean, you had very low, to make the delta move on the percentage side was not hard. So you'd be seeing more of the adoption of NFV technologies. I think the real question here is, are we going to continue to make progress on the service provider side on investments? And these are both CapEx and well, they're all CapEx investments. There are hardware and software investments in the two. I think these are rational growth curves. They're much more rational because we get as we the anchor grabs ground on NFV and you move into a revenue enhancing scenario. The big question is NFV was originally introduced as a way to have more efficient operations of their networks and perhaps to commoditize the hardware piece. But you make a good point about the revenue behavior on the services side. I think relatively near term is enterprise services and as well as consumer services, but I think for the carrier, the big money, if you will, from an NFV services perspective will happen on the enterprise front in the next few years. I think the models are clear. AT&T made announcements a year and a half ago about what percentage of network functions would be transferred to virtualized environments. And I think they were very bold about making those public pronouncements and signaling to the industry that they're taking this very seriously. The question would be to watch AT&T, Verizon, and others continue to make that progress.
NFE Task, NFE Board Task Force.
Yes, so TIA, my other hat, TIA is involved on NFE on two quick fronts. One is our board of directors has started a task force to help the industry identify the ability to monetize NFV. The other initiative is our NFE Security Working Group. This is chaired by Verizon, and there are some other carriers and OEMs, major OEMs involved, and some smaller startup companies involved. This is about the issue of a secure virtualized environment, both in open source technology, but also in standardized technologies. It's a vulnerability that we as an industry are quite concerned about, and that's why this has come to be last about 6 months now.
John Jackson, I want to go to you on IoT with a bit of a security spin to it. As IoT devices become really more prevalent in the marketplace through cheaper sensors and then transition to IPv6 that will really free up some internet addresses and facilitate further growth in the number of connected devices. Are these very devices being plagued by concerns over cybersecurity, as AT&T recently reported large increases in IoT security threats over the past couple of years?
So, I think I recall some news from last week about a quite conspicuous distributed denial of service attack, right, coming from consumer IoT, as we like to call it. So the short answer to your question, Abe, is a very, very loud and clear yes. In the wake of that particular event, there was a hue and cry about the need for kind of a universal standard for IoT devices. How, whether, whence that kind of happens, is kind of anybody's guess, I think, at this stage. But very, very clearly, this is where the market is going, and it is just a massive, massive and complex net new number of attack surfaces for the hacking industrial complex, if you like. So, yes, it's a problem, right? And at the same time, it's an opportunity for, service providers and for equipment vendors who, sell solutions to them. There's always talk, right, of security baked in, end-to-end security. IoT was never really meant, certainly not industrial IoT, to hit the public internet. So if to me, there's on one hand, talk about, hey, well, we think about this end to end, and then there's walk the talk. And on the walk the talk front, you might point to NetBond from AT&T as an example of a solution. It's not an endorsement, but just kind of an illustrative example of a solution that anticipates this reality that enterprises are going to be using multiple cloud service providers, and so how do I VPN to these guys? How do I connect all of my services to these multiple clouds without ever hitting the public internet? Thank you very much, and do it in a secure way. So that's kind of like getting out in front, almost literally, of this issue. But unfortunately, I think it's safe to say that the incident last week won't be the last one.
We are limited on time a bit. I want to get to both of you on what your forecast is, your own forecast is, for the next 3-4 years on verticals with the most activity. Give me your top two, whether that's intelligent transportation, healthcare, or robotics, or what have you. John Jacobs, I'll start with you.
Well, I'll give you one. From my view, is vehicular telematics, right? It's connected vehicle and autonomous vehicle. Those require huge connectivity solutions to be adopted and created in the connected vehicle space. That's one. Clearly, security. I know it's a horizontal, but I think as a focus of an industry deliverable, having a security theme across the various technologies is another.
John Jackson, your top two?
At the risk of, Jacobs went first, so he got to claim automotive there. So, that's kind of where I was heading. That just seems like a very conspicuous, market where we're likely to see these things. The anchor grab, John, as I think you put it, but I will see your horizontal and raise you a field service or field force. So, here again, when we think about, what 5G is going to mean in terms of, there's high data rates and low latency, and carrying this video tonnage, for example, in an extremely efficient way, allocating network resources dynamically and extremely efficiently, standing up services at low cost instantly. So we talk about network on demand. I think that where we see a lot of activity right now is across this horizontal, right? So you have techs in the field, you have maybe first responders in the field. I think the applications are going to be manifold there.
John Jacobs, I want to wrap up with you just for a minute. I want to ask you about how you think our readers and our viewers and our members and non-members, just the industry at large, would receive some more focused data analysis on international markets, maybe in next year's MR&F.
Right. So the MR&F will expand its international breadth in 17. The current version has a deep dive on North American market. But particularly, I think it'll talk about market structures, which you haven't done before. So the reality of fragmented markets, perhaps in Europe, what the impact is on consumer adoption and services price points, the idea of roaming, data roaming as a major issue. So from an internet, and also lastly, from a public policy perspective, we'll begin to bring in things like cross-border data flow issues, because that does have an impact on planning for data center and for data usage, but also has security and public policy implications.
John Jackson and John Jacobs, thanks for being on this year's review of the 2016 to 2020 Market Review and Forecast. We've never had anybody on this show, at least just two people with the same initials, and who look distinctively similar, except for the tie.
I have a tie.
Exactly. So, well, at least he's not here, and you are physically in the room.
Yeah.
That's the only difference, I guess. Anyway, thanks for being here, and we'll see you guys this time next year, I guess.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks, John.
And for our audience, TIA's Market Review and Forecast has the most current data analysis for market trends in the communications technology industry. And if you're doing your 2017 planning in this fourth quarter and beyond, you can purchase the MR&F by logging on to tiaonline.org. So long.